Welcome to WagerTalk TV. I'm Kelly Stewart, at Kelly in Vegas on Twitter, joined by Ralph Michaels at Cal Sports LV. Ralph, some of my favorite things, we get to ask questions from some of our viewers. This question comes from L. Carroll 25. Really popular guy here at WagerTalk.
He's got a lot of questions.
He's got all the questions,
but
right?
They're good questions, and they're questions that I'm sure he's thinking it, and there's another 10,000 people that just don't think about asking that same question.
Absolutely. So what are, if any, merits to preseason power rankings when handicapping college football? Looking for advice on which stats I should be paying attention to from the previous season that may help me in the beginning of the next season.
Well, if you are handicapping yourself, power ratings are a must. Even if you don't do your own power ratings, I would go out, get multiple sources, put them all in the mix.
We've talked about this before, and you do a college football newsletter for WagerTalk.
Yeah.
So you can definitely get some numbers from there as well.
Now, I do my own power ratings,
Correct.
so it's a little different. But even at the beginning of the year, I do my power ratings, and I put them into an Excel, and I take 70% of my grade, and then I take 5 or 6 other power ratings and make them 30% of my number. Because no matter how much you study, you're still not going to know every fact about every team, about every player. So don't be so big-headed that you think your number's the best numbers week 1 or 2.
I've said that a lot of times.
You have to be able to make adjustments, and you have to be able to understand that you just may have analyzed a team wrong, or a team just didn't mesh. So what should I look at? If you're to the stage of you're strong enough to make your own power ratings, the important things for me are, number 1, yards per game in conference play the year before. When you have teams like the MAC or the Sun Belt, some of those teams may be playing 3 SEC teams to get paycheck games, where some may play only 1 team, where the strength of schedule is so different. When you're comparing conference-only stats, it gives you a basis from one year to the next how good a team was, comparing them straight. Returning starters is like, well, duh, why are you talking about returning starters? But I think people misread returning starters very often. There are times that you look at Alabama, and Alabama may return 11 starters, and you say, oh, that's not good. But did you know in the previous 3 years, Alabama returned 11, 11, and 10. So they're returning the exact same amount of starters that they had for the last 3 years when they were a national championship team.
Right. So I might be going down a rabbit hole here with this question, but a team like Alabama also has so much depth and also tends to have big leads in games where those second-string kids won't ever be on the first team, but they've already got tons of playing experience in some of these smaller games. And you kind of, at some point, do you weight that? Do you say, hey, listen, they may only have 10 starters coming back this season, but 8 of the guys that are stepping up in their place and the guys who's left places are guys that have seen the field several times before?
Well, you have to include recruiting rankings.
Okay.
And that's where Alabama changes, because although they only have 10 starters back, they've been the #1 recruiting over the last 4 years. And when you're talking about recruiting, you have to look at multiple years, not just what happened last year, because as I do a freshman report. Some teams don't play any freshmen. So if you had the #1 recruiting class last year, Michigan did not play 1 freshman last year. So it doesn't matter that they had a top 20 recruiting class. If none of those people play, it's irrelevant. It's more relevant 2 years later when those same talented kids will now get on the field. A team like Vanderbilt, you say, well, they had 12 starters back. That's more than Alabama. They're going to be a better team, or they're improved. Well, no. Alabama had 16, 15, and 16 the previous 3 years. So although they have 12 starters, that's a down for Vanderbilt, and it's an up or an even for Alabama. Turnovers is a huge one. Teams benefit from turnovers, and if you're plus turnovers, you're going to tend to fall back. If you're minus turnovers, you're going to tend to increase. And the numbers I look at, these are back from my Phil Steele days. If a team was plus 11 turnovers or more, so basically you were plus a turnover a game, that's a lot.
Yes,
There's only a handful of teams that have that, but 65% of those teams had a weaker record the next year. Likewise, if you were fortunate and you were plus 10 turnovers or more, 67% of the time you decreased your record. So you look at yards per game, you look at starters back, you look at how a team finished last year. I do my plus minuses, I work them into my power ratings, and then again, all summer I'm looking at how teams adjust, how teams are playing, how teams are practicing. And The other thing to remember, the last final note here, scheme changes set a program back multiple years. There's not going to be a better example than Georgia Tech this year. Collins takes over from Georgia Tech. They've been an option team for a decade. He's now going to a traditional offense. They have only recruited one season for this offense. I think they're in trouble this year, but again, you have to make the change, and it's tough to do.
Okay, so now, because you said that before we end, Kansas State, where they went from a very vanilla offense, a very run option-based offense in the 90s and kind of transitioned, and it didn't fare well. Now with Chris Kleiman coming in, I'm a little nervous for this first year. We've seen a lot of guys leave, a lot of guys transfer, but we've gotten some good recruits in Manhattan, Kansas. But I'm definitely nervous because you can't get any more vanilla than Bill Snyder. So he's going to run some more offensive schemes that maybe are new to the kids that are playing in Manhattan.
You know what? Kansas State, to me, is the same as TCU. They didn't recruit the same talent. They worked well for the systems they're in. And I agree with you. I'm interested to see how it works out. I'll have a down arrow on Kansas State to start unless he pulls some surprises on me. It's difficult for those kids to change systems that have been in for all that year. And those kids that bought into the Snyder system, I'm sure over 50% of them have just been that's been embedded into their minds for the last 5 years. Snyder, 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 and now they make the change. So again, don't be afraid to admit you're wrong weeks 1 and 2 in your power ratings. Make those adjustments, and don't be afraid to make an adjustment big enough if needed.
Awesome stuff, as always, from Ralph. Last season, Ralph went 97, 69-4 in the NFL and college football. He increased his client bankrolls by over 63%. Right now, his NFL is priced at $8.99, but through Sunday, you can get it for $4.99. No coupon code needed. Even better, NFL and college football through the championship game is usually $12.95, but right now you can get it for $7.99. That saves you close to almost $500 off the early bird price.